Trump has found another way to shove his thumb into the eye of the Chinese government. And I want to talk about it because I don't think it's all that simplistic. And I think, especially from the standpoint of the left, where we tend to think about these things a little bit more through and we tend to have more qualms about this type of stuff, I think this provides an interesting dilemma in how to deal with this issue. So I kind of want to talk about it. Trump, interactions with Taiwan. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is Soapbox After Dark. I hope everyone is doing all right. This video is not going to be long, but it does provide what I consider to be difficulties, I would imagine, in dealing with foreign policy issues, that the issues are not always the easiest to deal with. The issue that I'm talking about has to do with Donald Trump's decision to sell $2 billion worth of weapons to Taiwan. Now, why is this a big deal? For the last several months, I've been delving into Chinese history. Now, usually when I delve into this stuff, I kind of just hit my head on it, but Chinese history goes back thousands of years. So mine has been more so with regards to the wars, like the Boxer Rebellion, the intrusion by Western countries, opening the ports, those type of things. And this kind of fight for independence or fight to push back Western powers in China. But this gets become a hot button issue when we're talking about this issue of Taiwan. When Donald Trump first took office, one of the things, faux pas, that Donald Trump was kind of ignoring this notion of one China policy, and he calls Taiwan. This was, again, just somewhat of a big deal. It's a hot button issue for China. China considers Taiwan to be part of China. Taiwan doesn't consider itself to be part of China. And you can see right off the problem here. If I consider you to be under my thumb and you say I am not under your thumb, there is no middle ground in that case. I'm either under your thumb or not. In Taiwan's case, they're not. Now, why does the United States come into this? The United States comes into this because the United States has legislation that says it will stand by Taiwan. Taiwan Relations Act. Under Jimmy Carter. Taiwan's Relations Act. Now, what this eventually boils down to in process is we will sell you weapons in order to defend yourself, and we will pressure China to not try to militarily or to not try to take you and force you to be under their thumb. This is fascinating politics. Like I said, this goes all the way back to the war. If you remember, they just had D-Day celebrations. And in this odd way, they tried to exclude China and Russia. Both of these countries took the brunt of the force, meaning between Japan and between the Nazis. They took the brunt of the casualties. 20 million Russians, 10 million or more Chinese in regards to these wars. And yet they weren't necessarily included in the celebrations for some reason. That's somewhat odd considering, again, they took the brunt of the casualties in these wars. Not to mention the Nazi war machine broke its back on the Russians. And if it wasn't for the Nazis breaking its back on the Russians, Japan would have been a much harder opponent to take down. My point is very basic. The issue with Taiwan is a hot button sensitive issue. And this has now become apparently part of the trade negotiations. The United States has decided that we are going to sell them Abrams, tank, and Stinger missiles. If I can get my items in order. Long story short, the United States has decided we are going to sell them weapons. Now, again, making the point that this is somewhat of a hot button issue, this is a problem. They're going to be $2 billion in Abrams tanks, Stinger missiles, all sorts of technology with this notion of trying to prevent and push back the menace of China. Here's the catch. The United States has been Taiwan's only weapon supplier anyway. So even though the story is just coming up, the story is giving a new light just in the context of the trade negotiations between the two countries. Going back to, if I am not mistaken, 2015, this was one representative very pissed off
严重损害中国主权和安全利益。中国政府和企业
December 2015, Obama administration. So this is not a new issue. The issue just takes new light within regards to the trade war taking place between the United States and China. Here's the catch, and here's the question. Well, two things. First, this has nothing to do with Taiwan sovereignty. Zero. The United States acts out of its own self-interest. It doesn't act on these notions of freedom and democracy and everything else. We've supported dictators all over the world when those dictators worked in our interests. We work in regards to geopolitical and economic self-interest. Take a look at this map for the moment. Oh, and by the way, the tensions between China wasn't just started with Trump. Whether you were the Democrat or whether you were Republican, the Obama administration was trying to deal with this with the TPP. The Trump administration is taking more of a ham-handed approach. Even Sanders makes this argument that something needs to be done in regards to how we change our economic system to better deal with a world with China in it. Take a look at this. These are military bases. Look at Japan. Japan is full of military bases. The military bases in Japan has nothing to do with Japan. Japan is an ally of ours. They're a close ally of ours. It has everything to do with China. Japan gives us a close attack point against China. The weapons that we've landed in those islands that those people don't want in their country. Meaning the elections that Okinawa has been trying to get the military bases off their islands. Those military bases, again, are there for China. Same thing with the Philippines. Same thing with Thailand. All of these places are our allies. All of these places have military bases. And again, this is to create this kind of full spectrum dominance over the world. We understand that China is going to be a major military presence. Just by virtue of momentum, they're going to be a major military presence. They're already a major economic presence. And this is a country with 3 times our population. And a lot of that country hasn't necessarily been developed in the sense of economic exploitation. They will be a presence. And our goal up to this point has been to shake a brick at them. We're confronting them militarily in the somewhat of a low level. But the point of Taiwan and that deal is to put weapons as close to China as we can possibly put weapons without having this reasoning of we just want weapons nearby just in case. Well, that reason doesn't necessarily fly. People frown upon that reason, but we're fighting for the sovereignty of Taiwan. That reason goes across a little bit better. The president of Taiwan has made it clear that she has no interest in being under the thumb of China. And so trying to get these weapons to her country, she looks at it as an issue of sovereignty. We're able to protect our sovereignty from military incursion through China using these weapons. But these are not singular things. Insofar as the interests of Taiwan and the U.S. coincide, we will be on their side and we will be their staunch ally. Is the United States willing to go to war in order to protect the sovereignty of Taiwan? That becomes a more interesting question. And that's a question I have no idea the answer to under President Donald Trump. That's an astonishing question. I have no idea the answer. I don't know if anyone does. The treaty says we will look poorly upon any kind of incursion into the sovereignty of Taiwan. So we don't know what that means. That's left ambiguous for a reason. The president needs to be able to be more hawkish or less hawkish, and they don't want to tie his hands down in future administrations. My point is this. This has nothing to do with the protection of Taiwan. This has everything to do with corralling China and putting weapon systems as close as possible to China. We will sell Taiwan whatever Taiwan wants because Taiwan is an ally of the United States in this sense. And if we went to war, they will be on our side. We're selling them Abrams tanks, Stinger missiles, essentially things to protect their homeland. Here's the second point, though, and this becomes one of those moral qualms for lefties. Is it wrong for Taiwan to want independence? My point would be no. It is not wrong for Taiwan to want independence any more than any other country to want independence. Is it wrong for them to assert themselves as an independent nation? No, not in the least. They have every right to call themselves an independent nation. Um, it gets a little sketchy about, even the naming, the Republic of China, because it was thought at one point that that was the capital of China, not Beijing. It gets a little dicey. But my point is this: what do you do from the standpoint of the left on this issue? In Syria, the biggest argument was, well, look, it's none of our business. Iraq or Iran and Russia was called in by Syria Bashar al-Assad because they were allies of that country, in which case they were dealing with issues pertaining to them. We weren't invited. But this is different. This is us being invited. This is them wanting our interaction in order to maintain their sovereignty. And there's a question of whether or not Taiwan would have been able to maintain its sovereignty were it not for pressure from the US. Now, that's a secondary question of whether or not that belongs into the military category. It's hard to know whether or not China would use military means in order to take Taiwan, even though apparently that topic has come up, and Beijing has said that, yes, we reserve the right to use military arms in order to take Taiwan because, again, in their mind, they're the sovereign and they are right to use military force, so it is allowed. From the lefty standpoint, what do you do with this issue? Do you look at this and say, well, look, the Taiwanese have every right to be independent, and us, from the standpoint of the United States, should be able to use diplomatic means in order to ensure their independence? But therein lies the quagmire. What happens if that's not enough? Do you really push hard in order to maintain the sovereignty of Taiwan, even and up to the point of using military arms to defend the country? And us giving them weapons is our way of saying, yes, we're going to allow you to defend yourself by, here are weapon systems. But let's be very clear, Taiwan would not be able to defend itself against China's nuclear weapons. And what does it mean from the standpoint of the United States, and does the U.S. get involved if it gets more, let's say, drastic? And what does it mean from the standpoint of the left? Does the left get involved? Is this enough of a reason for the left to say, yes, in this situation, you should use weapons or military arms in order to defend Taiwan? Or is it still, yes, in this situation, you still try to use diplomatic means in order to ensure the sovereignty of Taiwan? Because I would tell you this, the diplomatic means are not going to matter. They're not going to matter. They're not going to matter. There is no such thing as world law. There is no such thing as rule of law from the standpoint of international nations. Big powers do what they do that is in their best international interests or their own local interests. Meaning, in situations like Taiwan and you have a larger power like China, Taiwan has no ability to defend itself in full right. Meaning, and I know I said it a little weird, but I'm saying all things being equal, left to their own devices, they can't defend themselves. Does political pressure matter in this situation? What does the left do? I'm curious about what this means from the standpoint of the left, and how far does the left go in asserting and defending its independence? Me, from my standpoint, I think its independence is somewhat of a big deal. I don't think the sovereignty of nations should be trampled. And in this case, I mean the sovereignty of Taiwan. Whatever you want to think of China being a sovereign nation, is it also true that Taiwan has any level to assert its independence? And should they automatically be under the thumb of the Chinese? I don't know the answer to this. In fact, I don't even know if there is an answer to this in the context of right and wrong, in so much as what takes place in the larger world. What is the consequence in the larger world? And what is the consequence in regards to the individuals that are involved in the process? At one point, it seemed like these guys were moving towards a peaceful path. But at this point, it seems like the U.S. is sticking their thumb in their eye, and something that, for the most part, seems to be, was, at one point, corralling into this notion of, if not on the same page, at the very least, not hostile. And that seems to be sticking the thumb in its eye. Gotta be honest, I don't know the answer to this particular question. And like I said, maybe there is no answer, per se, to the question. I don't even necessarily know what the question is, per se. Maybe, is there a right and wrong in this? And if there's a right and wrong, what is that right and wrong? And I'd argue there probably is no right and wrong. There's just action and consequence and what takes place in the larger world. But these are the things that lefties have to deal with. And these are not necessarily the easiest questions in the world to have to grapple with. So what is your opinion, Jamal? That's just it. My opinion, this is kind of difficult. We are left. We're not cowards in the face of need of justice, are we? So your answer is war. Look, I'm not one of those people that think you can avoid war in every situation. There are situations where, regardless of what you want, the other person provokes it. You know what I mean? Like, there are some situations where you're stuck in this situation of either being forced to always back down or have to assert yourself. In the case of Taiwan, there are no two paths, right? I mean, if China is saying you're under our thumb, you're under our authority, and Taiwan is saying you're not, I don't know what's the middle ground between those 2 points. The question becomes, what happens with China asserting itself? The catch here is this is somewhat of a false question, though, right? I mean, because even though China said, yes, we will use military means and everything else, that hasn't necessarily been shown up to this point. And that could be used to get people into a point of view that they don't necessarily need to get into right now. But I got to be honest, I am one of those people that believes in the individuality and the sovereignty of states. And if the U.S. is requested assistance on this, does the U.S. flake? I don't think we do. I mean, I guess my point is this. Whatever diplomacy or diplomatic skills needs to be on display. And I suppose it needs to be on display up to this notion that we would defend this country militarily if necessary. Because the fact of the matter is, if that's not on the table, then the negotiations are going to be doomed for failure. This is kind of the ability to walk out the room clause. If any negotiation, you need the ability to walk out the room. Otherwise, you're stuck with whatever they give you. I don't think this is an easy question, but I do think that needs to still be on the table. So I'll leave it here. I think this is an interesting question for lefties. So let me put your answers at the bottom and we can talk about it. Thanks all. Bye-bye.